The gun fell from Jake Morrison's hand, like it had suddenly turned to fire. The metallic clatter against the dusty floorboards echoed through the abandoned trading post, but all he could hear was the girl's whisper, still hanging in the air. "Don't touch my brother." She couldn't have been more than 16, with tangled auburn hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, stained with something dark that could have been mud or blood. But it was the way she stood, protective, desperate, fierce, that made Jake's trigger finger freeze mid-squeeze. Behind her, crumpled against a pile of grain sacks, lay what Jake had assumed was another drifter, another thief who'd broken into the Hendricks' trading post while the family was away in Tucson. The boy, and Jake could see now it was just a boy, maybe 14, had his eyes closed, breathing shallow and quick. A fever flush colored his pale cheeks. "He's sick," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through Jake's confusion like a blade. Not stealing, just sick. Jake had ridden hard for 3 days, following reports of break-ins along the territorial road. The Hendricks family had been good to him when he was nothing but a saddle tramp with empty pockets and emptier prospects. When word reached him that someone was ransacking their store, he'd come looking for justice, or revenge. In his mind, they'd been the same thing. Now, staring at this girl and her unconscious brother, Jake felt the familiar weight of doubt settling in his chest. The weight that came when the world refused to be as simple as a wanted poster. "You broke in," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We needed shelter." Her chin lifted slightly, defiant despite the tremor in her hands. "The storm 3 nights back. He caught pneumonia, I think. I couldn't let him die in the rain." Jake's eyes swept the small trading post. Canned goods had been opened, but not ransacked. A few blankets were missing from the shelf, now wrapped around the boy. Medicine bottles stood open on the counter, expensive stuff that the Hendricks kept for emergencies. "You took their medicine. I'll pay them back." The words came fast, desperate. "Every penny. I swear on my mother's grave." Something twisted in Jake's gut. He'd heard those words before, from his own lips, spoken to men who'd shown him mercy when he deserved a rope. The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose boards of the trading post. Storm clouds were building again on the horizon, dark and heavy with rain. And somewhere in the distance, Jake thought he heard something else, the rhythmic thunder of approaching horses. Jake holstered his gun slowly, watching the girl's shoulders sag with relief. But the approaching hoofbeats made his jaw clench. Multiple riders, moving fast. In his experience, that usually meant trouble. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah. Sarah Crenshaw." She glanced toward her brother, then back to Jake. "That's Tommy." The name hit Jake like a physical blow. He knew that name. Had seen it on a wanted poster just 2 weeks ago in Deadwood. Sarah and Thomas Crenshaw. Wanted for robbery, assault, murder. The reward was substantial, $500 for the pair. But looking at this girl, this sick boy, Jake couldn't reconcile the brutal killers described on that poster with what he saw before him. Sarah Crenshaw was supposed to be a hardened criminal, leader of a gang that had terrorized merchants from Colorado to Arizona. The girl in front of him looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. "You running from something, Sarah?" Her eyes flicked away, then back. "Aren't we all?" The hoofbeats were getting closer. Jake moved to the window, peering through. The cracked glass. 5 riders, wearing the distinctive blue shirts of territorial marshals. Leading them was Marshal Pike Henderson, a man Jake knew by reputation. Henderson didn't believe in bringing outlaws back alive if he could help it. "Marshal's coming," Jake said quietly. Sarah's face went white. "We didn't do what they say we did." Her voice was urgent now, pleading. "The murders in Silverton. We weren't even there. We've been running for 3 months from something we didn't do. Tell that to Henderson. Men like Henderson don't listen to people like us." She moved closer to her brother, her hand resting protectively on his fevered brow. "Please, I know what you must think. I know what the posters say, but Tommy's never hurt anyone in his life. He still cries when we have to trap rabbits for dinner." Jake felt the familiar war raging in his chest, the same battle between justice and mercy that had defined his life since he'd pinned on a badge. He'd been a lawman for 6 years, had brought in dozens of outlaws, but he had also been on the wrong side of that chase once, knew what it felt like to have the whole world convinced you were something you weren't. The hoofbeats stopped outside. Voices carried through the thin walls, Henderson's gravelly bark giving orders to his men. "Back door," Jake said suddenly. Sarah looked at him with surprise and hope warring in her eyes. There's a creek about a quarter-mile north. Follow it west until you reach the old Apache Trail, then south to the mission at San Miguel. Father Martinez will help you." Jake pulled a roll of bills from his vest pocket, pressed it into Sarah's hands. "For the medicine and food." "Why?" she whispered. Jake looked at Tommy, at this sick boy who supposedly murdered 3 men in cold blood, and saw instead his own younger self, desperate, misunderstood, running from a world that had already decided his fate. Because sometimes, mercy is its own kind of justice. The front door rattled as someone tested the latch. "Don't move," Henderson's voice cut through the trading post like a blade. "We know you're in there, Crenshaw." Jake stepped away from Sarah and Tommy, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. Through the window, he could see Henderson's men spreading out around the building, professional, experienced. They'd done this before. "Jake Morrison?" Henderson's voice carried surprise. "That you in there?" "It's me, Marshal." Jake kept his voice steady, casual. "Step outside, Morrison. We've got business with whoever you found in there." Jake glanced back at Sarah. She had managed to get Tommy to his feet, though the boy was leaning heavily against her, his eyes unfocused with fever. They weren't going to make it to the back door. Not quietly, not fast enough. "Seems like a lot of firepower for a couple of kids, Henderson," Jake called out, buying time. "Those kids killed 3 good men in Silverton. Sheriff, deputy, and a store clerk who tried to help." Henderson's boots creaked on the porch. "Now, step aside and let us finish this." "Funny thing about that," Jake said, moving toward the front door but not opening it. "I was in Silverton 2 weeks ago. Talked to some folks about those murders." Through the cracked window, Jake could see Henderson's face tighten. "What folks?" "Shopkeeper across from where it happened. Said he saw 4 men that night, all of them older, bearded. Didn't match the Crenshaw description at all." Jake was improvising now, but he'd learned long ago that the truth had a way of hiding in plain sight. Makes a man wonder who's really behind those killings. "You calling me a liar, Morrison?" Jake caught Sarah's eye and nodded toward the back room. She understood, began helping Tommy toward the rear of the building. "I'm calling it interesting," Jake said. $500 reward for 2 kids who maybe didn't do what everyone says they did. Makes me wonder who profits from keeping them running instead of talking. The silence seemed retched long enough that Jake knew he'd hit something. Through the window, he watched Henderson's hand move to his gun. "You're making a mistake, Morrison. Wouldn't be my first." The crash of splintering wood came from behind Jake, Henderson's men kicking in the back door. Sarah's sharp intake of breath told him they'd been caught. "Drop your weapons!" A deputy's voice from the rear of the building. Jake turned to see Sarah and Tommy frozen in the back doorway, a young deputy pointing a rifle at them. Tommy could barely stand, sweat beading on his pale forehead, but Sarah stood straight, her chin raised in defiance. "Don't touch my brother," she said again, but this time Jake heard something different in her voice. Not just protection, recognition. She knew this deputy. "Hello, Sarah." The deputy's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Been looking for you for a long time." Jake saw it then, the way Sarah's shoulders tensed, the way the deputy's grip on his rifle loosened slightly. There was history here, personal history. "David," Sarah's voice broke slightly on the name. Henderson's voice boomed from the front. "Bring them out, Collins." But Deputy Collins didn't move. His eyes never left Sarah's face. "You really didn't do it, did you?" Collins said quietly. "No," Sarah whispered. "We really didn't." The standoff stretched like a held breath. Collins kept his rifle trained on Sarah and Tommy, but Jake could see the conflict written across the young deputy's face. This wasn't duty. This was personal. "How do you two know each other?" Jake asked quietly. Sarah's eyes never left Collins's face. "David is my fiancé. Was supposed to be married last Christmas." Collins flinched as if she'd struck him. "Before you disappeared. Before you became outlaws." "Before we were framed," Sarah corrected, her voice gaining strength. "Before someone decided we'd make convenient scapegoats for their crimes. The evidence was planted." Tommy spoke for the first time, his voice weak but clear. "David, you know us. You know Sarah. Does she look like someone who could murder 3 men in cold blood?" Jake watched Collins struggle, saw the man's certainty cracking. Through the front window, Henderson was growing impatient, barking orders at his other men. "Collins, bring them out now." "Sarah," Collins said quietly, "there are things you don't understand. Things that happened after you left. Like Marshal Henderson getting promoted right after the Silverton murders? Jake interrupted. Like him suddenly having enough money to buy that big spread outside Tucson? Colin's eyes snapped to Jake. How do you... Because I pay attention. Henderson's been tracking these two for 3 months, but he's also been making sure they stay one step ahead of real justice. Can't have them talking to the wrong people, asking the wrong questions. That's not... Colin started, then stopped. Jake could see the pieces falling into place behind the deputy's eyes. Think about it, Sarah said softly. Who told you where we were tonight? Who always seems to know just where we'll be, but never quite fast enough to catch us clean? Collins lowered his rifle slightly. Henderson said he had a reliable source. His reliable source is us, Sarah said. He's been herding us like sheep, keeping us running scared so we can't stop long enough to prove our innocence. Through the thin walls, they could hear Henderson organizing his men for a full assault. Time was running out. Sarah reached into her torn dress and pulled out a small object, a locket, tarnished silver catching the lamplight. She held it out to Collins. Remember this? You gave it to me for my 16th birthday. Look inside. Collins took the locket with shaking hands, opened it. Jake couldn't see what was inside, but he saw the effect it had on the deputy. Collins's face went pale, then flushed with what looked like rage. The real killers? Sarah whispered. I managed to get a photograph before we ran. It's all there, David. Henderson and 3 men I didn't recognize, standing over Sheriff Morrison's body in Silverton. You've carried this for 3 months? Waiting for someone who'd listen, someone who'd believe us. She paused. Someone who knew us before the world decided who we were supposed to be. Collins closed the locket, his decision made. There's a window in the storage room, leads to the north side. Henderson's men are watching the front and back, but... Collins! Henderson's voice was sharp with suspicion. What's taking so long? The deputy looked at Sarah, then at Jake. Give me 2 minutes, then run. Collins stepped into the main room. Jake closed behind him. Through the window, Henderson was pacing on the porch, his hand resting on his gun butt. They're secured, Marshal, Collins called out. But Morrison here was right about something. Found this on the girl. He held up the locket. Henderson stopped pacing. What is it? Evidence about Silverton. Collins' voice was steady, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. Think you should see this yourself. Henderson pushed through the front door, his eyes immediately scanning for Sarah and Tommy. When he didn't see them, his hand moved to his weapon. Where are they? Tied up in the back room, Collins said smoothly. But, Marshal, this changes things. Look. He opened the locket. Henderson leaned forward, squinting in the lamplight. The moment his eyes widened in recognition, Jake knew Sarah had been telling the truth. Where did you get this? Henderson's voice was deadly quiet. Like I said, found it on the girl. Collins stepped back slightly. Funny thing about photographs, hard to argue with them. Henderson's gun was halfway out of its holster when Collins drew. The deputy was faster, younger, cleaner, with the speed that comes from fighting for something you believe in rather than something you're trying to hide. Don't, Collins said quietly. Through the broken back door, Jake could hear the soft sounds of Sarah and Tommy making their escape. He gave them another 30 seconds, then cleared his throat. Seems like we've got ourselves a situation, gentlemen. Henderson's eyes darted between Collins and Jake, calculating odds, looking for angles. You don't understand what you're doing, Collins. There are people involved in this, important people, people who don't like loose ends. Then they should have thought of that before they decided to use 2 innocent kids as scapegoats. Collins kept his gun steady. Hands up, Marshal. You're under arrest for the murders in Silverton. You can't prove anything. Can I? Collins pulled out a second item, a badge. Sheriff Morrison's badge from Silverton, the one that had supposedly been lost in the robbery. Sarah had this too. Pulled it off your vest after you killed him. Henderson's shoulders slumped in defeat. Jake quickly disarmed the marshal while Collins called out to the other deputies, explaining the situation. To Jake's surprise, none of them seemed shocked by the revelation. Henderson had been operating alone, and his men had been following orders they'd never quite felt comfortable with. By the time the sun rose, Henderson was in shackles, and the real story was spreading through the territorial network. Sarah and Tommy Crenshaw were cleared of all charges, their names removed from the wanted lists. Jake found them 3 days later at the mission in San Miguel, just as he had directed. Tommy was recovering well under Father Martinez's care, color returning to his cheeks. Sarah was helping in the mission kitchen, her torn dress replaced with simple but clean clothes. "What happens now?" she asked when Jake Apper eoched. "Now you live," Jake said simply. "Collins is waiting for you in Tucson. Says there's still a Christmas wedding to plan, if you're willing." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "And you? What's next for the man who gave up a $500 reward to help two strangers?" Jake looked out across the desert, where the morning sun was painting the mountains gold. "Think I'll head back to the Hendricks place. Owe them some money for medicine and supplies. Maybe stick around and help out until they get back from Tucson." "Jake," Sarah said as he turned to leave, "thank you for seeing us instead of just seeing the posters." Years later, when Sarah Collins would tell her children the story of how their parents reunited, she would always remember that moment in the trading post when a stranger chose mercy over justice, kindness over certainty. And in the retelling, she would always end the same way. Sometimes the most important choice a person makes is the decision to see another person's humanity, even when the whole world has decided they don't deserve it. But Jake Morrison, riding back toward the Hendricks place with the morning sun on his back, was already thinking simpler thoughts. Sometimes you just had to trust your gut about people. Sometimes that was enough. Behind him, the mission bells began their morning call to prayer, the sound carrying across the desert like a promise that mercy, once given, echoes longer than anyone expects. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. If you felt it too, subscribe and stay with us.